One day I will learn to properly play this thing. Today was not that day. Why, hello there. I didn't see you coming in. Well, that's not exactly true, since it's not like I'm seeing you now either. This is just a pre-recorded video after all. But you know what's also not always true? Indeed, the title of the latest Memories Off entry, which, believe it or not, has been one of my most anticipated games of this year. I will admit I was quite apprehensive about its potential quality, given how the latest entry turned out. But it's not like I want this series to stop altogether. I mean, I'm already far too deep into the Memof rabbit hole to just get out of it. But can you blame me? It's kind of cozy down here. And hey, there's something to be said for a series that's managed to keep going as long as this one has. But is this the long-awaited comeback the series deserves? Or did mages fumble it once again? Hey there, this is Miran, and this is my review of Memories Off Sousou, Not Always True.
Story.
So this would be the part of the video where I would give a brief summary of the story. But here's the thing. The game doesn't really have an all-encompassing plot. Maybe the only thing that could be considered one is just the lone fact that the protagonist has an appointed fiancée whom he has never seen. But that's really kind of it. Instead, each route is essentially its own thing, with the only exception being the two main girls, whose storylines are deeply tied. But as for the rest, it's actually perfectly possible to never see anyone else besides the route's main girl. Literally not even once. In other words, this game doesn't really have a common route in the traditional sense. This does make the game feel somewhat fragmented, but thankfully the cast itself is surprisingly strong. Maybe one of the strongest the series has had so far. Something I've always appreciated about the Memories Off games is that characters usually feel very grounded, never relying too heavily on common and cliché tropes. Regarding the character writing in Sousou, I think it particularly excels at depicting the different stages of a relationship, from simple acquaintances to friends to lovers. I was a big fan of how these transitions were gradual and subtle, but at the same time, you could also tell the point when the relationships moved from one level to the next. It reminded me somewhat of Amagami, since that's another game that shines in that area. In fact, there are some characters in Sousou that wouldn't feel out of place in that game. Overall, it's a massive improvement over since Memories cast, and I'm indeed going to take every opportunity I get to dunk on that game. God damn, what a disappointment. At any rate, let's look at the main girls one by one, starting with the main duo, Sei and Nini. Yes, I'm aware this is not what one by one means, but their roots simply go too hand in hand to separate. This side of the story begins when Itsuki goes out with his friends to a family restaurant, and they order far more than they can eat. After leaving most of their food behind, Sei, who works as a waitress at the restaurant, scolds Itsuki as he's about to pay the bill. This causes Itsuki to realize he had been acting too carelessly, often getting caught up in the moment. Wanting to get closer to her and learn from her, he asks his childhood friend Neni for help, and eventually lands a part-time job at the same restaurant where Sei works. Sure, the premise itself isn't anything special, but I found the dynamic between the protagonist and Sei to be oddly endearing. However, do keep in mind that Itsuki often comes across as, how shall I put it, a bit artistic, if you know what I mean. Here, take a look at this scene.
お腹めっちゃ鳴りましたね。
聞いた？
はい。
元気よく答えなくていいから。
お腹空いてるんですか?
I was honestly quite worried at first about his personality, but he kind of grew on me, mostly thanks to Sei. She's the polar opposite of him, down to earth, yet still kind and warm. To be honest, I consider her to easily be one of the best girls of the entire series.
なんで？キモ。
I think she represents a great example of the type of grounded character writing I mentioned earlier, and the contrast between her personality and the protagonist led to a handful of amusing scenes. Neni, on the other hand, I just didn't care that much for. She's your usual childhood friend character, but with a slight twist, although the game doesn't do a particularly good job of hiding what that twist is, nor does her personality develop that much after the eventual reveal. I guess this is a good time to talk about the story's mystery plot, since it's closely tied to Sei and Nini's routes. If I'm honest, it left me with mixed feelings. On one hand, I appreciated that it went back to the psychological thriller style of mystery that Innocent Feel pulled off so well. But on the other hand, I don't think Sousou was as elegant with its execution. While I found the main twist quite neat, as it gave new meaning to parts of the plot that hadn't really resonated with me, I don't think the game takes its premise far enough. Don't go in expecting a big dramatic finale where everything gets wrapped up perfectly, because even though this part leans a bit more into the plot, it's still, at its core, a character-driven story. That said, there's one thing that I feel I need to bring up. Essentially, this side of the story splits into two branches. One that clearly feels like the good path, and the other that's, let's say, a bit more questionable. This might be the first game that's ever given me face cramps from how hard I was raising my eyebrow throughout. If you asked me to objectively rate it, I would probably tell you that it's pretty bad. But at the same time, it's so wild that I can't help but feel some appreciation towards it. There was certainly a level of commitment to the idea, and in some ways it feels like watching a massive train wreck. Probably not what the game intended, but entertaining nevertheless. At any rate, let's talk about the other girls, starting with Akira. If I'm being completely honest, I went into her route rather reluctantly. I wasn't a fan of her design, nor are tomboyish girls much of my thing, but her route completely won me over. It kicks off with Akira suddenly proposing to the protagonist that they become a couple, and this is how it went.
私に付き合ってくれませんか？
無理。それじゃ。
What a Chad. Okay, so there's actually a bit more to the story. She's an exchange student from Germany who was chosen for her soccer skills, as the school's soccer club was searching for a star player. However, after suffering an unfortunate injury, she's now unable to actively participate in the club's activities. Feeling guilty about this, she tried convincing the school administration to send her back home, but they refused. So she comes up with a plan to be seen as a troublemaker, pretending to date boy after boy in the hopes of getting expelled. Hence the fake proposal. Yeah, sure, she ain't the brightest, but this is a type of premise that I've always liked. It reminded me of Miyabi's route from Sorkara, which is one of my favorites in the series, and this one delivered as well. The banter between the MC and her was quite entertaining. I will say though, I got the impression that the protagonist was written differently from Sei and Nini's routes, with him being far more decisive and assertive. Admittedly, it was a welcome change. Akira, on the other hand, had this easygoing and playful demeanor that made her very charming. Maybe a bit too playful.
へえ。
I think this bratty Kohai needs some correction. Wrong type of game. Wrong type of game. Jeez. Nonetheless, I was surprised by how much I enjoyed her route. Setsuka was to me another clear standout. Her route centers around a dispute between her and Tsubame, the returning character from Memories Off Second. As such, this route is the one that contains the most references to the main series. This alone was enough to draw me in, but on top of that, Setsuka was great as a character in her own right. At first, she's presented as somewhat of a rebellious delinquent, which creates a great contrast with the protagonist's goody-two-shoes personality. In fact, at the start of the route, they don't even like each other that much. However, this dynamic is precisely what makes their relationship so engrossing, as it gives them plenty of room to eventually grow to appreciate one another. The gradual buildup was excellently handled, making the romantic scenes highly rewarding. Needless to say, I was a big fan of this route. Lastly, there's Kazuni. If I'm being frank, I thought her route was just okay, if slightly underwhelming. The route starts when the two of them meet at a bookstore, where they find out that they share very similar otaku interests. The actual plot of the route kicks in a little bit later, so I guess I can't delve too deeply into it. Oddly enough, though, it uses a premise that's very similar to one seen in a recent entry in the series. Admittedly, I think it pulls it off better, but it was still strange to see such a blatant rerun. They made for a cute couple of dorks, though, so it's not like the route is without its own merits. Just perhaps not exactly a memorable one. There's actually still one route left, but I'm not entirely sure if it should be considered a spoiler or not. Technically, it probably should be, since it only unlocks after finishing every other route. But mages, with their boundless knowledge, are already plastering that route all over the game's promotional material, so I guess it's okay to talk about it. No idea. Anyway, if you want to keep this part a surprise, feel free to skip to the next section. Otherwise, stick around. Alright, are they gone now? Okay, so in the final route, the protagonist gets into a mech suit armor, fights every single heroine in a battle royale-style brawl. All right, now for real, this is your last chance. To be honest, it's not like it's a particularly massive reveal or anything. Essentially, it's just an extra route focusing on Rei, a girl that only appears very briefly during your first playthroughs. This also means that I only have this one clip of her to show here. So here's a short animation of Rei dancing to keep your eyeballs entertained. Anyway, in all honesty, I thought this was the weakest part of the whole game. To me, a final route should either be the true climax of the story or a route that goes all out on the fan service. And just to clarify, by fan service I mean introducing new character cameos and other references from the series. Not the spicy type of fan service, you pervs. Instead, what we got was a jarringly out-of-place horror-themed route that makes very little sense, neither within the context of the game's story nor on its own. It seems like this route was written by the same author as the Corpse Party games, and while I'll admit I've never played any of them, if this route is anything to go by, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. It all felt very cliché with an ending that left way too many plot holes and unanswered questions. It's honestly a baffling inclusion, and I think it's better to consider it more of an extra rather than the final chapter of the game. Rei was pretty cute, though.
シリーズとの関連性
At any rate, with this being the latest entry in a long running series, and as someone who has played all the mainline titles, I think I should address whether you can play this one as your first Memories Off game. The short answer is that you can, but you shouldn't. Back in my Since Memories review, I mentioned that it spoiled a very important moment from the series, and the same thing happens here. Although at this point, that spoiler is probably inevitable for any entry moving forward. However, Sousou does take things one step further, as some parts of the game, especially during Satsuka's route, more or less expect you to be familiar with events from previous entries, in particular from Second, but also Omoide ni Kawaru and even T-Wave. There are a couple of scenes that will probably make newcomers feel slightly alienated. Of course, it's not like the route itself becomes completely incomprehensible or anything, but a big part of the enjoyment comes from those nods and references. Also, for the love of everything that's holy, mages, stop teasing me with all the My Mary Maybe references in the background and re-release the goddamn game. I don't care if you phone it in and use the crunchiest AI image upscaling tools available. I'm willing to pay good money for it. Just get your ass out of your Steins Gate milking obsession and do something worthwhile with your own bloody IPs. And include Natsuyumi Yawa and Ryukoku while you're at it. I've never played those, but they look cool.
演出
Regarding the game's presentation, I think it's mostly fine, but I did have some reservations with it. I was a bit worried when I heard that the series' original character designer was returning, since these comebacks can go either way. But I think he did a great job once again. I particularly like Kazune's design, but Nenny's perpetual cat lips were cute too. Don't know what's going on there though. Maybe it's a genetics thing. The voice work was excellent across the board, with the main duo being the two clear highlights. As for the music, overall, it was decent, but I feel that Takeshi Abo has produced better OSTs in the past. Still, I've always appreciated how he manages to create completely different versions of tracks by rearranging the instrumentation and making clever harmonic changes. It's a great way to create a sense of cohesion across the soundtrack. I wasn't a fan of the jingles used between scenes, though. I thought they lacked subtlety, often feeling overly energetic and at times even intrusive. However, the main issue with the game lies in its technical side. As you can see, I played the game on Switch, so I can't tell if this also applies to the PC and PlayStation versions, but the game was oddly laggy during menus. I feel mages should consider updating their engine. Features such as skipping to the next choice or jumping back in the backlog should really be standard by now. I also noticed a couple of goji, nothing too distracting, but given the game's delay, these types of issues really should have been ironed out.
まとめ
To conclude, Memories Off Sousou is a solid return to form for the series, but not without its quirks. The character writing is the strongest it's been in a while, yet the mystery aspect of the story feels somewhat underdeveloped, which is amusing, considering that ever since mages took over the series, it's always been the other way around. Nevertheless, to me, this entry managed to recapture what I believe is the core identity of the series, with its realistic portrayal of relationships and its subtle sense of world-building continuity. It might not be a title that catapults the series into new heights, but it's the type of comfort food that fans and perhaps even newcomers will appreciate. I give Memories Off So-So, Not Always True, a 7.5 out of 10. And that wraps up the review. If I were to rank this one among other Memof games, I think I would slap it right in the middle. That said, even if it wasn't perfect or a series highlight, I actually quite enjoyed my time with it. Although if you have zero attachment to the series, feel free to knock the score down half a point. Funnily enough, in the time it took me to finish this video, Mage's already announced its fan disc, which should be releasing around winter this year. I also kind of wonder if they have any plans to translate this game. Part of me wants to say the chances are low, given how Shin Memo probably didn't perform too hot sales-wise, but I think they could do something similar to what they did with Robotics Notes. As in, releasing the main game and its fan disc as a single package in the West. That would be neat, I think. Anyway, if you can, I recommend checking out the series. It might not be the greatest visual novel saga ever, but most of its titles are made with a lot of heart. I honestly think it's one of the series that handles its lore the best, and seeing its world and characters develop and change with time can be genuinely compelling. Here's to Memories Off. May the series never be forgotten. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Miran out.